Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you for taking some time today and speaking with us. My name is Tony Rossi. I'm the National Enterprise Director of Sales here. And today we're talking about unlocking your HCM potential strategies and unlocking your HCM potential and strategies for optimization. Nick, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Nick Anderson. I am a learning consultant here on PuzzleHR's learning and development team. So I mainly work with our internal folks and upskilling and developing, but I have just about 12 years of experience within the HCM services industry, direct support of clients, implementation, training clients, and now I get to upskill our amazing puzzlers here throughout every day that I'm here.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. And again, my name's Tony Rossi, and I've, again, National Enterprise Director of Sales. I've been in the business for greater than 20 years and been really on the front end of this in the sense of selling both services and technology to clients looking to improve their HCM experience. So I've been in the evaluation portion of it and deployment portion of it, and thankful to be presenting some solutions today and giving you some thought points on on how to maximize the potential around HCM. So let's jump right into it. So from an agenda standpoint, we broke it down in a couple of different sections, and I've got some slides here to present. But let's talk about the impact of optimized HCM. So first off, when it comes to optimization, it's no longer optional. It's a requirement, right? And it starts with choosing the right vendor, and then moving towards an implementation strategy, and then moving to ongoing support. So why is it not optional? It's in today's day and age, when we're talking about HCM, it's a deep and wide solution set. It's not easy to move. It's a big decision because it impacts different parts of the business. And in order to get the results that you want from making this move, it requires, really not having a lift and shift, for lack of a better term, really where it's a thoughtful approach and you're optimizing it right from the get-go. So what I thought I'd start off with is really, what does HCM mean? And there's been an evolution in HCM. And, I remember a day when HCM really meant just payroll. And a lot of the other components of HR, whether it was benefits or recruiting or really, managing onboarding, that was all manual, tasks that were assigned to the HR department, and there wasn't any automation around it. And then, of course, we were in the .com bubble. I'm starting to date myself when I make these comments, but when everything became available on the web and became all of a sudden there was all kinds of services that were said, hey, you know what? If you need help with managing your benefits, no longer do you need on-site open enrollment and a health fair, right? Benefits fair. We have technology. Where time and attendance moved from, punch clocks to, electronic clocks to actually, scheduling software and time and attendance software, that was completely remote, and you didn't need a clock. You could use a phone, or you could, use some hardware, whatever the case might be. So all of that evolution really kind of has taken place over the past, call it, 20 to 15 years, and leads to where we are today. So when you think about the impact and benefits of optimizing an HR solution, really, or an HCM solution, you're thinking about better cost reduction in efficiencies, right? So, by having a better time system with rounding rules, for example, might help you reduce your labor cost, right? If you've got a better talent application that allows you to find talent, your time to hire is sped up. So there's different, obviously different benefits of optimizing, or different reasons why you want to optimize, but it always comes down to people and expenses, which is really what HR is tasked with. So before I continue on that, I should have started off by saying, please add questions, comments in the chat. If we see them, Nick's going to kind of look at them while I'm going, and I'm going to look at them while Nick is talking. We will try to address them. And if we don't address them, I promise you at the end, we will address them. At the end, we've left some Q&A time. So with that said, Nick, is there any other examples or anything you'd like to add? I've got some other comments, but I don't want to do all the talking. I figured, Nick, we can kind of handle this like podcast style. You can weigh in a little bit and we can, before we go on to the next topic. So what would you add on this topic of impacting an optimized HCM solution?
Yeah, Tony, just to echo a little bit of what you said, I loved everything that you said. I think it's spot on in today's world, right? It's not an option to optimize or not optimize anymore. In my experience, it can really lift a lot of things within a business, right? It can up engagement with employees, which I believe we're going to discuss a little bit today. It can take a lot of those manual processes, which we know are just really time eaters, right?
Right.
Is it worth payroll to spend 2 hours on a process that we could get down to 30 minutes if we're allowing the software to do what it really fully can do and is intended to do? So just kind of to piggyback off what you were saying about implementation, when that comes around, just know the time frame that you have during that implementation. Usually it's a small window, right, of time where you get to spend with those intelligent implementation folks at the vendor side. And so come prepared during that time, right? Look at holistically how this HCM system can really benefit all parts of your business, not just HR, not just payroll, not just benefits, right? As you mentioned, talent, recruiting, retention, timekeeping, right? Benefits, integration. So really think about all of that. So when you get into that implementation phase, you've got all those questions ready to rock, right? Throw them out on that very first call when you get the chance to. And that's going to set your HCM system up for success from day one. And if you can get as much of that taken care of on your initial implementation, that's huge. But just remember that you're going to be able to do those kind of things moving forward as long as you keep that communication open with the vendor that you're working with. And again, if you do that and you're looking to add a new module, right, say talent acquisition, and you haven't had that module set up yet, just always include all the parties, maybe the departments that are going to be impacted that before that situation or project kicks off. So you have everybody's ideas, concepts, wants, non-negotiables, right? And you can bring those to the table and be ready to have that ironed out and have an amazing talent acquisition model set up, ready to get those new folks on board for sure.
Awesome. Great point, Nick. Good stuff. So, a couple of things to think about. So when you think about your current environment, like, how long have you had your current system and what's changed in the business that is, maybe has an impact on the way you use your system? I've got an example to share, Nick, that you might find helpful and some of our listeners would find helpful too. So I'll give you a perfect example. Smaller company, kind of a unique niche that I found it was unique when we first engaged with them, was a private airline company. So really just a charter airline group. And it literally started with one plane and one set of, staff, like a staff of, a couple of pilots, one or two support staff on the plane, right? Attendants. And they had a very small clientele, very specific handful of clients that used them on very specific times, right? The demand was enormous. They received funding, and all of a sudden it turned into several planes, a bigger crew, a bigger client base. And now everything that kind of came along with that, one of the main pieces on their time and attendance or on their HCM piece was scheduling and FAA regulations and how they needed to navigate between where they were going and how much time the crew members were assigned and how much time they were spending in the air. So there was a compliance piece with FAA, and there was a scheduling component that changed. And they struggled through that manually through different time systems and different payroll systems. And it was a real hassle. And, you know, that caused for them to go to market and saying, there's got to be a better way. So they found some technology that embedded their scheduling, built in compliance with their scheduling, tied into the same system that was payroll. So that experience was seamless. And now, not only was it seamless, it involved a certain level of employee engagement, which we'll be talking about here in a few minutes, where their employees can now swap schedules, swap time, and still be in compliant, and they can do so from their mobile phone. Right. So that's a kind of a real world example where their business changed dramatically and they needed a better HCM technology to kind of move with that. Right. And another example that I think, you know, for some of you that are on this call that are probably living through this, but when you think about the ACA legislation that took place, now, I mean, it's got to be close to 10 years, right? Or at least 8 years. So, you know, what did Obamacare or, the ACA compliance piece really, how did that impact everyone? Well, it took data from benefits. It took data from payroll, right? How many, and data from time. So who are you paying? What are their hours? What are their benefits? And it took those three components, right? And it turned it into a tax return that needed to be filed. So when you think about this visual of all of these different components of HCM, and these are, again, the 6 main components, and you can get into the weeds or like subcategories within this, but, on how all of these interacted. So if you've had companies that maybe use someone for payroll, use a different system for benefits, and use a different system for time, now doing that annual return is a major challenge and a major pain. So you want to talk about the impact of an optimized HCM solution, just talk to someone who dealt with ACA manually and what that looked like, right? Nick, anything you'd add to that or any other examples you would say or?
No, I think those are great examples of just the realities of the need for HCM and, of course, always keeping up with the times, with the regulations and compliance.
Yeah.
And every business's job is to grow. So if you're growing, your HCM has to grow along with you, for sure.
Yeah. Growing and managing expenses, right? So I'm not sure how many CFOs we have here, but they're probably going to appreciate that. Right. So it's that balance of both. And, and that's where, a good system that's completely optimized allows you to do both. Right. So let's go to the next topic. And what we're talking about next is really data-driven decision making. And for all of you that have been through a demo, looking at these pretty new dashboards, right? I remember a time where it was the reports that were specific, like, every engagement that I would be on, a client would say, hey, I need this specific report, or the CFO needs this report on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. And when we have our board meeting, we need this report, or when I do a audit, I need these reports. Can you create these? And now that's turned into, hey, we want to be proactive and not reactive. We don't want a view of what has happened. We want to get ahead of what is happening. And any solution or engagement that you're part of, they're probably leading with some of their dashboards and some of their tools that allow you to make decisions early on. Whether it's turnover rates, or level of engagements. One of the most popular ones, and now it used to be a nice to have, and now it's a must have. It was kind of neat when we would bring this up back in the day, but now it's a requirement, is employees approaching overtime, right? So it's great that you can get a report to share what the overtime was and, and what that expense was, but people want to be more proactive and be able to find where the overage is going to be before it happens so they can make better decisions. So if there's people that are approaching overtime and there's a gap in hours needed, they can lean on someone who isn't approaching overtime and keep controls of that. Right. So those are just some great examples of just a great example of how data can help you drive decisions that have an impact on expenses and people, right? And again, how does it impact people? Well, if someone keeps getting hit up for overtime, maybe they're going to get burned out, and now all of a sudden your turnover is going to be impacted, right? So if you could balance those two out, then you can have an impact on your retention and have an impact on expenses. Nick, what would you add to that? What are some things that you're thinking?
Yeah. Just some of my past experience, especially my implementation days, here and otherwise, just really thinking about, future state is always an important thing for any business. But when you're looking at the HCM side of that, is what within these systems is going to be able to help me look ahead, like you said, right? And a lot of them have predictive analysis these days. So when you go into that report section, right, they still kind of lump it in with the reporting area in a lot of the software. But there's always an analytics side to it now. And it's not just a buzzword anymore. It's a reality, right? So they've built a lot of really cool tools into most of the HCM systems that allow you to real-time monitor that type of information, turnover statistics, labor distribution statistics. So kind of like you were talking about with that overtime. Why is this one department always working overtime and this other department isn't, and their work's combined together, right? So maybe let's look at it. Let's spread that work out a little bit different across the groups. And maybe we can get everybody working regular hours, get that work-life balance back in their life, right? So that goes to the personal side of the HCM, right? How it impacts the employees and their days to day. And like you said, a lot of it is a dashboard style. So it's easy to read, right? It's not a big, long spreadsheet like some of those old reports are, right? Where it's just, you get to the CZ type column situation and nobody's going to take the time to shuffle through all of that information when it's presented in that format. So if you can get some good charts, good graph data, it's easy for you to understand. It's easier for you to pull and do a quick hit meeting with the CFO or the CEO and say, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's our potential solutions. And then, they chime in and away you go, right? And you have that positive future that you're looking for your business, for sure.
Nick, you just said something that got me thinking about two things. I've got some examples to share, but you got me thinking about how, and we'll talk more about this in a couple of minutes here, but how critical it is during implementation to get your current state and what you're looking for as far as a desired state, taking the time and making sure that the system is configured to the way you need it to be to get that type of data, right? Because if it's not, those dashboards become useless, right? And they're not going to help, and you're not going to be making any decisions on it. But it gets me thinking about a couple of use cases too, and some of the things that I've seen. So like, for example, from I guess one of the most recent ones that I've had is we've helped a client deploy their performance modules, and within their existing system, there was a new module, a new release for performance. And what it did was it allowed them, provided it was configured properly, provided they had the right classification codes of employees and all of that, when it was time to do performance reviews, they could see, not only how did they review, like what was their performance score, but the system pulled up data to say, well, here's the last time this person received a raise. Here is how they compare to other people within their group, right? From a salary amount today and where, and where you'd like to move them to. And by the way, here's your budget, Mr. Business Unit Owner, of what your review budget is. So here's how you can carve it out. And also, there was another drop down to saying, here's what the market is calling for this specific job. right? So in this one page, they could sit there and really make a critical decision by saying, I have this amount of budget left. This is where they rank. This is where, if they left, what they could get, and then it even gave you some indication of, how much overtime have they been working, right? To give you some kind of a risk assessment of that, or, when was the last time they got a review and how far away from the average is it, right? To give you some idea of, hey, we can't lose this person. Look at where they stand, and here's my budget, and this is what I'm willing to allocate. Right. So it's just, there's so many ways that, again, we talk about people and expenses, that leveraging good data, right, in a great system is going to have you be able to make an impact on, people and expenses, right? That's going to be a theme, I guess, we'll keep talking about. So, Nick, anything else you'd add to that before we go on to the next topic?
I would just really echo the software that has the market values in there. I feel that tends to be a huge thing.
Mhm.
We have to remember most of our employees in this day and age are tech savvy to a degree, and so they're not afraid to go out to the Glassdoor.coms and the Indeed.coms and go look up that information for themselves, right? And
Right.
am I being paid my fair market value? So if the system can throw that information out, and like Tony said, you compare that against your allocated budget, and it's your superstar and you don't want to lose them, then you've got two very good pieces of analytics that are going to allow you to make that right decision and be able to keep that superstar on your team for sure.
No doubt. Yeah. Good stuff. And great segue to the next point, Nick. When you talk about employees being tech savvy, it used to be one of these things. I remember back in the day when, mobile became a thing, and I was in a position where I was selling technology, and I would talk about mobile, and people would say, well, that's not our population. No one's going to use their phone, you know? And, maybe that rang true 7 years ago in some cases, but I don't care who you are and what role you are doing. Everyone is using this, and it's a perfect segue to employee experience, right? So I can't think about, again, Amazon is not in the HCM business, right? But when I think about employee experience, I think about my family and how quickly my kids like to use, Amazon for expenses that they need, whether it's school or for home, or my wife or even me. And you think about, why is it that it, from an employee experience, well, they make it so easy, right? You can log in from your phone and it's the same experience from the URL, experience. And, whether you need to rebuy something, you can quickly find your orders, right? You can quickly do a search, and it takes that information, that, previous search information, and it puts what they think is going to be the next thing you're going to look at. And it's so quick to say, boom, I just bought it, right? I want it. It's done, and then you think about how, everyone is using one of these today, right? So if you're not thinking about, and we're all trying to find ways to get away from it. You guys can't see my phone all the time because of my background check here, but you guys, or my background here, but you guys know what I'm talking about here with your iPhone, right? There's probably not a person on here that says, I've got to limit my screen time, because we are engaged with our phones, right? Because of the way it's built and because of how things are easy. So if you're not thinking about the Amazon experience and thinking about the iPhone and how that relates to your people and your ability to recruit and your ability to retain, then you're missing a huge opportunity to optimize your solution, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. Go to your career page from your phone, right? Look at your job opening, or go to Indeed. And if you can't apply without having to take your phone and try to maximize it. I'm not talking because your eyesight's like mine and you've got to have a bigger print. I'm talking about just navigating through applying. And if it's not an easy experience, that is user experience, that is engagement even before they become an employee. right? That is a real missed opportunity for you to have an impact on engagement before they become an employee. Then take it to the next step. So now they are an employee. What does onboarding look like? Is it a phone call with you and your team? Is it you faxing some papers? Right? Is it partially on your website or, or electronically where they have to log in? Or can they not even onboard until they're an employee? Right? Is there, so what does that experience look like? And I don't need to tell the HR professionals that are on this call, you're going to lose your your risk of turnover in that first 90 days is higher than it is after. Right? So if your experience through your system isn't seamless, isn't engaging, is it going to leave the best taste in their mouth and want to continue through this process? Right. And if it's, and it's super competitive to find the people. So if you're not doing everything in your, in your power to maximize their engagement from the front end, right, then that's another miss. And then, of course, once they are an employee, and they're, and they're actively engaged, if you don't make it easy for them to log into the system and find a reason for them to engage, or if your providers that you're contracting with doesn't make the employee experience a priority, then you're going to struggle with your engagement. Whether it's gamification, whether it's recognition, all of these different nice tools that are out there. And it just comes down to the ease of using their phone to engage in the day-to-day, whether it's like the shift swapping that we talked about, as another example, right? So even open enrollment, right? How easy is it for them to open enroll? You want them to hit open enrollment as soon as possible, get it done. You don't want to have to be chasing people down, getting them to engage. You don't want to have to get on phone calls and answer unnecessary questions. It's inefficient. Have an optimized solution that is engaging is a game changer for that. So, Nick, what would you add?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you think about the average household these days, most people don't have a desktop computer anymore. Most people
Right.
don't have a laptop sitting somewhere in their house, unless, of course, they're like us and we work from our homes and our company provides them to us, right? Like you said, people are working off these little devices. We get scared if we don't know where they are. Is it in the right pocket, right? Or an iPad
Mm-hmm.
or a tablet of some kind. So all of those, you have to have that good application experience, right? Versus logging into a URL, trying to use the clunky web browsers that are on those types of devices. And again, making it bigger, making it smaller. Did I miss anything? So that experience has to be great from before employment all the way through 10 years there at the company nowadays.
Yeah.
So definitely things to think about. A good example that I can share, I put some old hats on during this past year end and helped some projects here at PuzzleHR with some clients of ours, and one of which is an international company. And they have a lot of remote employees, and they were using a very outdated old software. And they were having to use multiple different software and tools to track time, to report information, to do billing, all of that good stuff, right? And they've got mobile technicians that are in different cities, driving all over the place, doing work. And they switched to a newer system that had all of that integrated into one. And on top of that, their mobile capabilities for scheduling, for login time, login hours. Here's an extra project I did. They can report all that right from their device, right? That maybe
Yeah.
the company provides to them to be able to do that, or they get a stipend to use their own and download that app right there on that device. And that does a lot of things. It keeps the employees engaged. They know they're going to get paid accurately. It's less running stuff down for HR, right? Those digital door knocks, you're trying to email and get all that information back and forth. So it does a lot for employee engagement. And another example I can talk about is right here at PuzzleHR. We made a switch a couple of years ago to another vendor And almost all of our communication to the whole company navigates right through that HCM software. It's not a bunch of emails, is this a legitimate email? Is this phishing? Any of that kind of stuff anymore, right? It gets announced through there. We can all log in. We can communicate through that. We can have conversations as a company, which nowadays, right, a lot of our companies, especially in the United States here, have a very high remote work base, right? And so we don't get together in a conference room and have meetings quarterly or bi-weekly or whatever, like in the old days. So it's a great way for employees to be able to engage, whether it's work related, HR related. Hey, here's a fun water cooler question for today, and it gets everybody communicating and engaged across the whole company. So I think all of that is very important to think about as you're implementing or optimizing your HCM system for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nick. And of course, when we talk about engagement, I think the default as the users, you're thinking of how are you going to engage with the software, right? And the day-to-day, and how does it help you do your job, which is critically important. But the takeaway that I'd like all of you to have is to think about the employee engagement and how is that going to impact? Because if you have that ironed out and smooth, then your day-to-day is going to be a lot easier. Right. So just something to think about. So then, the next topic is really, again, integrating these technologies. So again, we talk about how HCM really breaks down into, 6 different categories: payroll, time and attendance, benefits, administration, talent, HR, and learning management. And as you all know, is that there are companies that do nothing but just one of these components. Okay. Now, most of them do it all, but the key is having them be integrated. What does it really mean to have them integrated? Because if it's not integrated, right, then and the level of integration we'll talk about here in a second too. But if it's truly not integrated, then what are you really getting, right, from an improvement? And helping you become more efficient and putting best controls around people and expenses. So when it comes down to the integration points, that's something that you really need to dive into and understand how are they all going to react to each other and interact with each other. And that is definitely a critical piece of the evaluation. If you don't go through and really test and see the user experience across the board, what the mobile experience is going to look like, what is your experience is going to look like during this process, then you really won't be able to drill down on the ROI and the productivity. So everyone talks about integrated. You may really, there's different levels of integration, right? Integration can mean pushing and pulling, right? Similar to your GL might be integrated because you download a CSV file and you upload it to your GL. So that's a form of integration. Or integration means that something has to happen behind the scenes. Some, function of passing data has to happen behind the scenes. And I know there's definitely some people that are on here that, that'll say, hey, my system says it was integrated. But, when push comes to shove or I run a report, I'm seeing disparating data, data that isn't, it says one thing in one area and something else in another area. I can't really trust it, right? So is it truly integrated? And then there's some providers that truly, it's really not integrated because it's one application, and there's downsides to that, as well, but there's also upsides to truly being one application. So, understanding the level of integration between these solutions and how they interact and what the experience is going to be key to really unlocking the potential of a truly optimized solution. So, Nick, what would you say? What would you add to that?
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with that statement you said when it's all in one may not always be the right solution. Yes, it may integrate a little more neat, right? A little more pretty. a little less back and forth or downloading, saving, uploading, that kind of situation. So
Mhm.
always kind of keep that in mind while you're working with your vendor. If there's particular integrations that you have to do, right? Like he talked about the compliance with the FAA and all of that, right? Within the flying industry is really do your research, right? Really look at all the systems that are out there. Start that conversation with your current vendor that you're looking to integrate it with, and start giving them some of those names of those companies that you're looking at, because they need to start doing their work on their end to make sure that what kind of integration is it going to be? Is it going to be push pull? Is it going to be out of here into here? Is it going to be an API where it sends that data back and forth like Tony was talking about behind the scenes? So make sure you do that homework and really figure out what's the best solution cost wise, production and effectiveness wise, and how well is it really going to integrate. Cloud-based technology,
Mhm.
just a few years ago was the future, right, Tony? Like you want to go cloud, that's
Mhm.
why we're here, we're in the future, right? Everything's cloud-based now. There's so much data that has to live, for small companies, medium companies, and large companies, that you have to hold on to. You can't keep it on a local server anymore. You can't just keep it on local devices. It
Mhm.
can't just be on a spreadsheet, right? And be well tracked for future purposes. So cloud-based is important because that's going to impact user experience, like we've talked so much about. It's going to impact capability to integrate with the newer piece of technology that you want to pull into your current HCM vendor as well. And when you guys make a decision to do an integration, really to minimize distraction or disruption in your business, really map it out, right? So you get the idea and then look ahead, right? And so what's a time of year where we don't have a lot of other transitions or things going on within our business that this type of work is going to interrupt and cause more headaches than positive situations, right? So that's one thing I always recommend clients think about. And then again, get everybody involved, right? Get everybody's non-negotiables. Make sure everybody get a list of wants, right? You don't know if you don't ask, right? When it comes to integrating different systems into your current HCM vendor, and really have all of that outlined well and mapped out. So when that project does start, you guys are a well-oiled machine ready to go. It'll get integrated and off you go.
Yeah. Nick, you said the non-negotiables, right? And that's circling back on the comment here in the chat from Malia. Integration and optimization needs to be clearly defined in every situation, right? You've got to figure out what the non-negotiables are, and sometimes it's gonna, and again, what we're talking about when we say integration here, Nick, is really integration between these six components of HCM, not integration with their carrier, because you're never going to not have that, right?
Yep.
Or integration with their 401k provider. Now, there's different levels of integration with that. Is it an API? Is it a push-pull, like you said? But it's integrating the key components of your employee experience and really what it takes to execute on HR, right? So, good stuff. Thanks for that, Malia. So integration now, right? I think the next thing is it leads to the employee experience, and of course AI, right? That's the word that is like the hot button, the hot topic in the industry of AI, and what does AI really do, and what's the difference between that and machine learning and all of those types of things. So when you really think about it, right? So AI, when it comes to HR, it really, there's a couple things. Number one, it helps eliminate the repetitive task that you have to handle, right? And that's really what it is that it's designed to do. So anything from managing your candidates, that things that could be repetitive, to onboarding, right? I'll give you some examples of AI. And really AI, what it comes down to is what's key to AI working is the data that it's pulling off of. having that set database, making sure that data is clear and what's in, how uh, it's clean, I should say, not clear, clean and accurate is everything. Without good data, whether it's AI or machine learning, it's not going to be able to give you good results, right? So I'll give you guys an example of maybe AI in your world today, where you see these chatbots, and we've all dealt with them, right? When we're online banking or whatever the case might be, and the chatbots that really work are the chatbots that are deep and wide in their knowledge, that can actually answer some of the detailed questions because they've got good, clean data, right? And it's the same way with your HR chatbots. So we have some technology where we support client, where we're frontline support for clients, their employee questions on certain things, whether it's time off policies or pay rates or pay rules. And we used to do it the old-fashioned way of just taking intake and then understanding that. And we're exploring the ability to intake that for clients and leverage AI to help us answer questions more efficiently and timely, right? So that's just one example of that. So Nick, anything you'd add to what we're talking about here regarding AI?
Yeah, the only piece I would say with that is really have that solid, clean data in there. A lot of HCM systems are going to start rolling AI out in different areas of their software. So really just keeping up, right? All of us, I don't know about the others on this call, but I interact with a lot of HCM systems for training purposes. And so I'm constantly getting the update emails, product updates, product briefings. This is what's changing. This is what's moving and shaking. Is to not just automatically archive those or throw them in your folder for that particular HCM that you get information from. Really click in and read on some of those articles to understand AI and how it's going to start interacting with that software, with your end users, whether you're an administrative user or an employee user, and just try and understand what it's doing and how it's going to operate. Because that's the best practice with any new technology, but especially AI, right? A lot of people, some people have fear of AI, some people have jumped feet first into it, right? And then there's those folks in the middle who kind of hear about it, or on the fringes and don't fully understand. So I would just put out as some homework for everybody is understand how AI is going to interact in your HCM system, either currently or in the near future. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's really no stopping it. So just fully understand it, because those kind of questions will come to you from employees, whether they're concerned or they're interested and they want to understand it better. And for you to operate within the HCM system as
Yeah.
administrators is going to be huge.
No doubt. So I'll give you guys a couple of examples of, AI or machine learning, or just, because they're sort of similar, but they kind of get mixed up as being the same. So like, for example, I'll give you some examples of, like, in the HCM world, you've got clients who have employees throughout the country in different states, different locals, and they have in different states and different cities have different local tax codes. Well, there's a vendor that's out there that takes all of that data, tax data, compliance data of, hey, this zip code requires this local tax code, and it's automatically fed, and it's part of, like, the application understands this and is updated. So the minute you type in this zip code, it prompts you to say, boom, you need to have this local tax. Right. So that's a perfect, that's a great example. Or, maybe your job descriptions, as you're writing them, it learns from what you're writing and what your other job descriptions are. So when you need to create a new one, it takes what it's learned and it gives you kind of a head start on that. Right. And then when you look at the DE&I, the impact that has had on HR and some of the things it's pushed through, I've seen technologies where it says, hey, when we present a candidate, you get all these job applications coming in, and we sift through the ones that fit your description based on tenure and experience and education, all of that. It will present you those candidates without their names, so you can remove bias, without years, and time frame, so you can remove bias, right? So you can look at from who they are as a candidate and make a decision based on that. And then it'll say, here's their name, here's their age, well, you can't share their age, but it'll give you the information that you can figure out their age, right? So you can say you've made decisions in an unbiased fashion. So these are just some examples, but again, it just comes down to, the right database and where is the source of that machine learning or AI. So I hope that was helpful, right? And it just in closing out, we're going to have some time here for some questions. But really, if I think about best practice for executing on optimizing HCM technology, it really comes down to execution, right? And what I mean by execution, it starts from the beginning of taking the time to choose the right system, right? Getting all the stakeholders involved, maybe bringing a technical consultant, an advisor coming in to run the RFP for you, if you can, give you some things to think about, maybe dissect your current roles and systems and where the gaps are and help you find the right vendor for that. The second part is executing on the implementation. And what I mean by that is really from an implementation standpoint, understanding their methodology and what is going to be your responsibility. Any good vendor should be able to help you resource plan your implementation and understand what is it going to take outside of my day job to do this and my team to properly execute. And the last piece and the biggest missed opportunity, I think, is managing the system. Okay. Some clients think, great, we're live. Now it's gumdrops and rainbows and it should be good and everything's going to be great. The reality is from the system needing to be stabilized after implementation to maybe there's applications that weren't completely deployed. They're part of phase 2 and they're self-driven deployments that you're going to be left with. Those things never happen, right? Or they happen and it's not done properly. You kind of just check the box because, again, you have a day job, or there's an upgrade, that impacts your system, or there's a change in your business. You just acquired a company or you just added a new benefit and you're going to measure that differently or whatever the case might be. So, everything from, again, choosing the right system to executing on the implementation to the overall managing of the system from there going forward, right? So those are the 3 parts to what I consider execution. So, Nick, what would you add to that?
Yeah, just being cognizant of time here. I would definitely say once it is implemented, like Tony said, take that time when, payroll stood up first, and then let's get time set up after that first payroll runs as an example. Don't just tick that box off, right? Really dig into the software, into that new piece that's set up, that's been implemented, whether it's during initial implementation or you wait a year and then you bring that time piece in, right? Really dig into it, really look to make sure that all those non-negotiables are really there. They're functioning, they're working the way you expect them to, the way they were explained they should work. If you had some wants that they were able to include, double check the wants, make sure that those are going to be functioning and feeding in between the different pieces of the system as well. And take advantage of the knowledge base areas that all of these vendor software offer, right? Most of the time you can find your answers on how do I do this? Where does this exist? Is this an option that I could get working within the system? Is there a module that exists that just wasn't discussed because of not enough time and things like that when we first kicked off with this vendor a year or 2 ago? And really dig into that when a need arises. And normally you'll find some answers and you'll be able to start to have those open conversations with the vendor and the people that you interact with there. And the other thing is when you're doing that, again, kind of what Tony said about not just checking the boxes, really digging in, is constantly do quality control as you're going through the implementation. Once one piece of it's done, jump in there and validate that information looks accurate, right? These departments are assigned to the right employees. My labor distribution set up, all my job numbers are there so I can bill back to my clients for all the awesome work that my employees are going out there doing on a day-to-day basis. Testing of that data. And of course, security always being in your mindset as well, right? If you're having to transfer information, make sure that you're working with the vendor on a secure way to do that. Because again, that's going to hit back on the employee level to make sure that they know that their information is being handled discreetly and securely while making transitions and changes for sure.
Awesome. Good stuff. So we've got about 8 minutes. We've got 3 questions. I would encourage you all, if there's any other questions, go ahead and feel free to put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat, whatever's easier for y'all. But we've got a couple of quick questions here, Nick, and I think we'll just kind of handle them the way we've been kind of going through this. So first question is, what are some best practices to consider during HCM evaluations? So besides some of the obvious things that we've already talked about, right? Maybe bring in someone to help, maybe understanding their methodology to implement all of those things, which we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But a couple things to think about is, again, you're always thinking about what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Is it a time problem? Is it an engagement problem? Is it a compliance problem? And then make sure you understand the expertise of that company, right? So every company that's in there in the HCM space that's going to offer the full suite of services, say, hey, we do it all. But I would challenge them and say, what's your specialty? What do you do really well, right? And sometimes they may struggle to be able to tell you that, but ask them, tell me about your history. Tell me about how you started as an organization, because understanding foundationally how they started and where they are could really give you some good insight on what are they really good at. And if they're really good at what you're trying to solve, then that really helps, right? That's probably a good sign that there's probably a good partner for you. And then the other part that I'd add to that, and I've kind of alluded to it, but I think it definitely needs to be part of your evaluation, is understand not only their support methodology, but their implementation methodology. How much of the lift will they be doing, right? How much of it will fall on your shoulders and that you'd be responsible for? And what does it look like? Right, from a resource planning standpoint, I think that's all could be very helpful. Nick, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo that same experience that you just said, is really drill down. One other piece I would add is when you see the demos, right? Because that's usually one of the first steps, right? That sales will offer is, hey, we can set up a demo of the environment. That demo is usually going to be a fully flushed, beautiful piece of software, right? Where they've got everything built out, ready to go, integrated seamlessly, right? And so as you watch that, make your notes as to how those pieces and parts might be beneficial to your business. Hey, this is a want, and I want it to work well with our business. And like I said before, bring those questions to that first call that you have with your implementation representative and say, here's how I saw it work on the demo, and I want it to work that way for us. And so you can flush out all those questions to get that seamless visual in the real life environment when it goes live for you.
Yeah, Nick, and great point, right? They always show you an incredible product and always gets you excited because it looks better than yours, right?
Yep.
And the user experience is better than yours. Don't lose sight that is a completely configured product and it didn't happen overnight. And if you want your experience to be that way, you need to make sure that you're putting in the effort to have it look that way. So what are some best practices to consider during implementation? Well, here's what I would tell you. You've already heard me say, identify resource planning, what's going to be involved, what is your responsibility, knowing that you guys have a full plate with your day-to-day job. That goes without saying, but whatever they tell you, right? Whatever the resource plan they tell you, plan on it being more than that. right? And so plan on worst case scenario that it's going to be more than that. Number one. Number two, you know, you want to talk about a January 1st start and how great that is to have a clean year. And there's lots of benefits to that. And I'm all about a January 1st start, but more specifically, if you can get ahead of it from a standpoint of where you're not in December doing all kinds of user acceptance testing and parallel testing, right? Because that's usually around the same time of open enrollment. That's usually the time with year end where people are trying to take time off for holidays. So don't lose sight of that, the fact that no matter when your go live date, usually the last 3 to 4 weeks is going to be heavy engagement unless you can plan ahead of it. If you're okay with that in December and it outweighs the benefit of, starting after, or, outweighs what it would mean to, maybe start later than that, and you're willing to deal with it, then that's great. But the only point I'm making is don't lose sight of that it's going to take longer than you think. And there's, and you've got other initiatives. Nick, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, the only thing is, think about that stress level. When we work in a high stress level, the outcome's not going to be what we want it to be. It just won't, right? Errors are going to occur. We're going to fly through some things so we can get to that finish line faster. And then that's the result we're going to get at the end. So always something to think about ahead of time is, do I really have the time to be able to make this work and work the way we want to and expect it to?
Yeah, great. So last 2 minutes here. So this is a loaded question. I'll try to answer it the best I can. Who would you rank as the top 3 HCM providers? I'll tell you what, there's all great companies that are out there, and it really comes down to your specific use case, right? And that's what I would do where, if I was ever pulled into a conversation saying, who do you recommend? If you ask that of anyone and they don't start with questions, then I wouldn't take their recommendation, right? Because the questions that I would start off with, what are you trying to solve? What component of HCM is critical to the day-to-day operations of your business, right? And, what is really your must-have? Without knowing those 3 pieces, I couldn't really recommend any, but if any of you have, questions you want to run past me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or send us an email, and I'd be glad to answer that. Nick, is there anything you'd add to that as far as the top 3?
Nope.
Remember, 100%. It's being
100%.
recorded, Nick. We don't want people to think we're biased, right?
100%. Ask questions, right? If you're not asking questions, then you're not really looking for a true solution.
Yeah. Ask questions that are relevant to what, on why you're making this move. So, but I think that's it. If there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap up. So we appreciate you guys taking some time. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you on the next session.
Thanks everybody.
Everyone.